So thank you, teachers, for joining TCTLA to talk about PD2Teach, the new ELAR and SLAR standards professional development that TCTLA is putting together. We come from all across the state today. We come from El Paso, we come from Bay City, Cypress Fairbanks ISD, Midland, Amarillo, Crosby, and Harris County. And we are here today to dig in deep to the new standards. So we are going to look first at the new introductions that the teams have put together, but also the first two strands. So Karen, why don't you start us off and let's talk about where we were in 2009 with the TEKS.
Absolutely, Kelly. The 2009-2010 strands that we are currently working under are reading, writing, oral and written conventions, research, listening and speaking, and that also includes figure 19. The new TEKS strands that we're transitioning to, Shona, could you tell us a little bit about those?
The new 7 include developing and sustaining foundational language skills, comprehension, response, multiple genres, author's purpose and craft, composition, and inquiry research. And I'd like to also note with this, the phrase right before that is that the introduction refers to these as 7 integrated strands of developing and sustaining the foundational language skills. So I think that interconnectedness is something that is going to be a theme throughout our conversations today.
So let's spend some time in the introductions. The introductions to the 2009 standards were shorter. There were about 2 to 3 paragraphs depending on the grade level. And now we have 7 to 9 paragraphs of introduction material that will really help teachers understand the form and the function of the new standards. So how do these introductions, how will they help guide teachers with new avenues in instruction?
The introductions make it very clear that spelling is no longer an isolated skill. Reading and spelling are reciprocal skills and should be taught as such.
Yes, that's in the second thing, and I like where it said that the decoding is internalizing what they're encoding. So you've got the decoding and the encoding working together. And as a past teacher for first and second grade, I didn't do that, and I find that very important now. That to understand spelling leads to reading, in that you have those children who they can spell the but then they come to it in their reading and well, what's that word, and they try to sound it out without realizing they already know it through spelling. So it just lends itself to togetherness and those activities together.
Something else I noticed from the introduction, and specifically for the Spanish language arts and paragraph 1, is not only are they more authentically written to the Spanish language, but for Spanish literacy. And this is exciting because, as we know, Spanish is a more syllabic language. And as opposed to English, there's not really a close letter and sound relationship, as it states in paragraph 3. And therefore, this is going to lend itself for authentic instruction in the classroom.
Also in paragraph 4 in the 6 through 8, it talks about how ELLs should be encouraged to use the knowledge of their first language. So we're building on that in an elementary school setting, that they'll be able to transition then to the middle school level and be able to use that knowledge, the discourse from learning. They're able to use that discourse and they've learned their language, but they're also still learning what they need to in the middle school setting in English, but their base is Spanish as well. That makes a nice transition.
Yes, and building on what you ladies just said, I think it's very important that teachers realize that the learning takes shape and takes form when it's authentic. From student to student, using the vocabulary in the language of using academic language, I think that's when students really grow.
So like John was just talking about with conversation that's going on in the classroom, that's something we struggle with at the high school level as well. And when we try to get them thinking on deeper levels, that's the first thing I try to have them do, engage in a genuine conversation with something about a topic, because sometimes we'll ask them to write essays and they're like, I have nothing to think about. I don't know what to write about. But if I have them talk and have a discourse with someone beforehand, it becomes a lot easier. And I feel like if we are able to have them participate in these conversations, even starting at an earlier level, because sometimes they'll come to high school and they've never had the opportunity to speak to another person about ideas that they have. So I feel that's a really important thing, especially when we're talking about, we've added in thinking. Thinking is a huge word addition to this introduction, so.
Jonathan, do you think that because we've added self-selected texts, that changes the discourse?
I mean, definitely. I mean, when you're thinking about how you're approaching topics and how you're going to be teaching, you're no longer thinking about, oh, well, I've got this one piece I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach you a skill, and you're going to use the skill regardless of what I put down in front of you. And I think that not only empowers a teacher, because then you're not so much focused on getting them to do one thing, but it also empowers the students, because then they automatically see that objective that they're supposed to be doing. They pick up on what they're expected to do, and I feel like it helps them perform it a lot better than if they're trying to do the same thing everyone else is doing.
The developing and sustaining foundational language makes it very clear that students are expected to self-select and read for sustained periods of time. I think that's important to note. So students will be having opportunities to do authentic reading on books of their choice, and in turn also authentic writing. So I think that gives students an opportunity to do something a little bit more, that's going to be more rewarding for them. And whenever it talks about, it's very specific that they will be increasing their amount of time of self-selected reading, and that's going to move away from teachers teaching specific books and move into teachers teaching skills.
And I think if there's a big difference between taking ownership in education and being assigned something to do. And I think that makes the learner more responsible, or be more aggressive about learning new things.
So John, how much time would you spend with just the introduction part of the new TEKS as a new teacher?
I think it's more about application. I think it's about preparation and collaborative work amongst teachers so that we can dig deeper, go deeper into what it means to get the messages out to kids so that they can produce authentic work.
I think the clearest thing that these standards, you're thinking about new teachers trying to figure out what are you going to do with these standards. I think this is really a model of what the TEKS do for us. There is a foundation here where the TEKS help us build knowledge for whatever it is that we're going to do. Now in the early grades, there's a lot of attention paid to breaking the code of the language and really developing these skills for phonics, fluency, and decoding. These are some of the comprehension skills that we use to be able to diffuse any text. Then we move kids directly into making meaning, where we're making the connections, evaluating, synthesizing, and summarizing, which then in turn help us climb that wall of what do we do with what it is that we have learned. And that turns into a lot of times about that discussion and that group work and the collaborative work with writing, that we're able to apply what it is that we've learning, which might in turn send us back down here to, do I need more words or more systems to figure out what this text means? And then go back, and it's this recursive cycling thing that gets more complex as kids move up the grade levels.
So we've spent a fair amount of time in the introduction, and I think it's good that teachers go back and they sit down with a team and they plan and they say, this is what the introduction says, and here are 6 to 9 to 7 paragraphs, Spanish language arts, English language arts, of introductory material that explain why the TEKS have new strands and what teachers need to think about before planning with the new strands. So that was a really strong discussion.